Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Beth and today I am going to start a new series for you. But first I want to talk a second about the last series I did. Now the last series I did was about 3 or 4 videos on self-publishing. If you haven't watched them, I'll link them down below. I made them when I was first really getting into making videos, and I haven't really been on here that long, less than a year. But I hope that I feel a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera. Not that I'm showing it off now. And that I could make more sense at this point with my knowledge, minimal though it may be, of being able to make videos and do editing. So if there's any part of that you would like me to redo or go more in depth with, or if I didn't cover a topic that you would like for me to cover, please feel free to let me know. And if there's anything else you would like me to do a video on, please leave me a comment down below and tell me. This series is actually going to be following the chapters in Wired for Story by Lisa Crone. I'm not sure, it's C-R-O-N. I want to take each chapter and discuss it kind of in depth, not just so that you know what she's talking about, but also so that I can feel good about taking the time to research it a little more fully and really close read this one. Now, I got this as the book in my storied box, which is a box for writers. However, they didn't have enough people subscribed, and so that particular subscription box will be ending with this month's send out, and I didn't order this month. I didn't have the revenue for it, which makes me very sad because I was really excited about that box, and they just weren't able to keep it going. I know that there are a lot of subscription boxes that are doing really well, and I'm glad for that, but they are mostly subscription boxes that are books being sent out to people that want to read YA or romance or whatever, and I was really looking forward to having a box for writers. So if you know of another subscription box that is specifically for writers, please do let me know, because I would love to try those out and see what I think. I am really trying to get into that community instead of being the stereotypical writer who sits in her basement or in her loft and writes by herself, because as much as writing is a solitary endeavor, it is also one where we need things like writers groups and beta readers and friends who understand that you're insane and will message them little bits of story at 3 o'clock in the morning and expect them to answer you as soon as possible and tell you whether or not it's any good. Sorry, guys. I'm glad you liked the sentence, though. Anyway, so let's get into Wired for Story. This is the writer's guide to using brain science to hook readers from the very first sentence. And what's very interesting about this is not that it is taking old philosophy that we all know or theories, but it's taking actual, fairly recent neuroscience and applying it to writing. And Lisa Crone is an instructor at the UCLA Extension Writers Program and has worked in publishing at W.W. Norton and as an agent at Angela Rinaldi Literary Agency, as a producer on shows for Showtime and Court TV, and a story consultant for Warner Brothers and Village Roadshows. She knows what she's talking about. She knows about story, and she's taken the time to take these recent breakthroughs and kind of show us how the science behind it applies to what we're doing so we can make our work the best it can be. And I do want to read you just a little snippet from the summary on the back of the book. It says, backed by recent breakthroughs in neuroscience as well as examples from novels, screenplays, and short stories, Wired for Story offers a revolutionary look at story as the brain experiences it. Each chapter zeroes in on an aspect of the brain, its corresponding revelation about story, and the way to apply it to your storytelling right now. And so far I've read the first 2 chapters. I am going to be taking this a chapter at a time, so I'm beginning today with the intro and the first chapter. And then I'll come back in a few days with chapter 2, and then a couple of days after that, chapter 3, etc. If you would like to pick up this book and do a read along with me, please let me know so I can know to wait a little bit for you to get it. Your library might have it. If not, a local college library might have it. If not, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Hastings, etc. I'm sure all the bookstores will have this or can get it for you. Okay, I'm going to start with the intro now. In the intro, it does exactly what it's supposed to do. It introduces us to the idea of story as connected to our brain. So it says our neural circuitry is designed to crave story, and we crave story for the pure and simple fact that it originated as a method of bringing us together to share specific information that might even be life-saving, such as, hey, Uncle Bub went in there to check what was in the bushes that was rustling, and he got eaten by a hungry lion. Don't do that. So there is also an implicit framework for a story to catch our brain. So if someone is rambling or going back and forth about a lot of other things, you tend to wander off. I'm sure you've noticed that in some of my videos. I'm sure you've noticed that in books you've read or when you're talking to your cousin or whatever. And so this starts discussing immediately how we can maybe cut bits and pieces that are unnecessary out of our writing in order to really catch our audience. It also says that the regions of the brain that process sight, sound, taste, and movement are activated when you are reading a good story. So according to a brain imaging study that was published in Psychological Science in about 2012, I believe, those pieces of our brain are activated. Therefore, when you're reading a good story, you're in the story. Your brain doesn't differentiate from you sitting there in the chair reading a book or you actually going out and doing whatever's happening in the book. Everything is in the story, and that's how you feel like you've really experienced those things. And then that way you don't actually want to go check in the bushes to see what's rustling. You know to hurry up if you feel like you're being followed. You know to make a couple of extra turns and get as close to other people as you can. And chapter 1 is entitled How to Hook the Reader. I want to show you really quickly, at the beginning of every chapter, you have How to Hook the Reader, or whatever the chapter title is, and then it gives you a cognitive secret and a story secret. Chapter 1's cognitive secret is that we think in story, which allows us to envision the future. And the story secret is that from the very first sentence, the reader must want to know what happens next, which means you have to snag them immediately. If you are just setting up what the story is about and you don't have anything that makes them want to continue on, then a lot of them will put it back down and may not even purchase your story to begin with. If they pick it up, as a lot of us do at the bookstore or the library, read the first sentence and we don't enjoy it. The first sentence in this book, by the way, caught me right away. First sentence of chapter 1 is, in the second it takes you to read this sentence, your senses are showering you with over 11 million pieces of information. That was the first sentence. So that made me go, wow, 11 million pieces of information. What's going on with that? And then I continued on and loved it. The next part about this that I want to discuss with you is not only does it have little subheadings throughout the entire chapter, at the end of every chapter, it has a checkpoint for you. So instead of me trying to remember everything that I enjoyed about the chapter I wanted to discuss with you about the chapter, every week I'm just going to go through the chapter checkpoints and discuss it with you a little bit. So chapter 1 checkpoints. Do we know whose story it is? As in, there must be someone through whose eyes we are viewing the world that we have been plunked into, which is the protagonist. Okay, sorry for the random inserts that are going to be happening now. I decided after I filmed this video that I wanted to use the questions at the end of each chapter, not only for my own use, and not only to discuss with you minutely, but to combine the two. So I do have 7 protagonists in my current work, which is The Way We Were, the second half of it. And it's a little bit confusing even to me, so this question has really made me stop and think, whose eyes are we looking through and can we tell the difference? And that has helped a lot. So if you have more than 1 or 2 protagonists that are switching off, you really need to make sure that the reader can tell who each one is. And if you yourself get a little confused, then that is a good point to stop and go back and fix things. So think of your protagonist as the reader's surrogate in a world that you, the writer, are creating. Have you created a world and a protagonist that are pulling the reader in and making them want to see through their eyes? Is something happening beginning on the first page? Don't just set the stage. Jump right in with something that will affect the protagonist and make the reader hungry to find out what the consequences will be. Unless something is already happening, how can we want to know what happens next? I did that one correctly. At the beginning of The Way We Were, since I'm currently working on the second half of the story, I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning, and one of our main female protagonists is falling asleep, and she dreams about yelling at someone, talking to him about how he's in love with her, and she's been kind of backing off for lifetimes, and he needs to get his act together or she's going to be gone. And then all of a sudden there are werewolves and a dragon, and she is like riding on the back of a dragon. And then when she wakes up the following morning, the gentleman from her dream is there to pick her up and take her to work because they work together and have been friends for years. So that hopefully will draw people in. The people looking for romance will be intrigued by that part. The people looking for fantasy will be intrigued by that part. And hopefully everybody can come together and be intrigued together. Is there a conflict in what's happening? And will this conflict have a direct impact on the protagonist's quest, even though your reader might not yet know what that quest is? Yes, they are the definition of conflict. Is something at stake on the first page? And as important is your reader aware of what that is your reader aware of what that is? I cannot read this correctly. It says, and as important is your reader aware of what it is. So is there something at stake, and does your reader know what is at stake, or can they imagine what is at stake? It may not be exactly what's at stake, but draw them in. Aside from the obvious, I have mentioned a little bit that there are werewolves and a dragon, and that is because she is immediately transported back to a several lifetimes ago previous life in which she is somebody helping the leader of a group trying to defend himself as he becomes the total overlord, which is a terrible name for it, but I don't want to give too much away, of several sets of these groups. And so she is there with her dragon and he with his group, and they are trying to defend their land and their right to be the ruling class because they did fight their way to the top. So that hopefully is a conflict that kind of brings them in and gives them a little taste of what might be to come. And then, is there a sense that all is not as it seems? This is especially important if the protagonist isn't introduced in the first few pages, at which case it pays to ask, is there a growing sense of focused foreboding that'll keep the reader hooked until the protagonist does appear in the not-too-distant future? Man, I hope so. Otherwise, I am not nearly as good as an author as I think I am, and I really don't think I'm all that great right now, so that would be bad. And then finally, can we glimpse enough of the big picture to have all-important yardstick? Which means, do we have enough big picture that gives readers perspective and conveys the point of each scene, enabling them to add things up? We don't know how the story is going. How can we tell if it's moving at all? So you need to be able to be writing in such a way that the reader can come back and take the yardstick of the intrinsic setup for stories that we have been born with. We are hardwired to have this framework about stories, and we may not even know ourselves until we start trying to write them what that framework is. However, when we start reading a story, we know that there is a certain framework that we expect it to uphold. And if it is not built in such a fashion as will go with the framework and the blueprint of a story we already have in our mind, then we are more likely to put it away. That's not saying that you as an author cannot create something that's never been seen before. It is saying that you need to make sure that while you are building this fabulous new kind of story, you have to still work with that framework and you have to include it, because otherwise nobody's going to read your fabulous new story. This is particularly important for those of us who are trying to work with more than the typical 1 or 2 protagonists. So if you think about Leigh Bardugo's Six of Crows, where you have, I believe it's 5 or 6 protagonists, and she is switching back and forth between them. So one chapter is Kaz, and then Inez, and then on from there. You know, because of the headings, who you are supposed to be following in that chapter, and then hopefully you understand their voice and thoughts enough to be able to read and immediately go back into them. But it's something that you have to be very, very careful about. And although I did not do my research on this, I'm sure that she rewrote that at least a dozen times. And there are probably still places where she looks at it and thinks that she could have done better. I know I felt like there were a couple of chapters with different protagonists that sounded the same. And that is something that I am really struggling with in having 7 different protagonists, because sometimes the only one who has a really different voice is my antagonist, who, I mean, he's a demon, so that's probably why. Because we have a very, very firm idea of what the story framework should be. And that is all for the intro and chapter 1. I really appreciate you guys sticking with me this far, and I'll be back with you soon with a shorter video talking about chapter 2. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you again. Bye.